Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom thoughts.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Mirke again. I really enjoyed the call-in episode. Thanks for your comments. I'm going to second what Daniel was saying about 2.5 hour sessions. Well, I think he was saying two, but I played in a weekly game. I think it's getting close to 2 years with 2.5 hour sessions. It was online, so yeah, it worked very well. And you are right about how VTTs can be a little fiddly sometimes. I would say, you know, after you get used to it, it works a lot better. So maybe a few sessions will be a little time consuming, but then you get used to it, and then then you level up and have new abilities and whatnot. This is a 5e game, so then you have to kind of learn a little bit more. So you do reduce some of the time there, and also you can getting everybody on and logged in and ready can take a little bit of time, but I still found it to be a very good time limit to play. So yeah, that worked very well. And there were times when people couldn't play for sickness or whatever other reason. I know for me, with like the kids and all the other responsibilities, it was kind of like a breath of fresh air to not play one week. But we had it consistent, so we played a lot more often than not.
You make a good point there, Merc. VTTs really maybe don't have, for the other reputation, probably don't take as much time out of the game space than even people not knowing what their characters do, or not knowing the rules, or having to look up rules in, say, some old school rule book that things are not organized the way you think they are. And not saying anything in particular, but there are lots of things that can delay the amount of play in a session. And a lot of it is about getting used to what you're playing with, whether it's the rule set or the VTT that you're using to play online. And a big advantage of a VTT can be that you don't have that travel time, right? I mean, you still have to take a little time to bring up the VTT and get connected and everything, but depending on how distant you are from a game store that you might play a regular session at, or somebody's house, that's usually going to be less time. Of course, now the disadvantage for VTT is you're not around the same table, you're not sharing the same snacks. There's a presence to being in the same space with people that you don't get with VTTs, and having cameras and audio and that sort of thing can kind of mitigate that, but it's not really the same thing. So there's advantages and disadvantages, and I probably was not thinking about that when I talked about VTTs before, just talking about the uh, the things that I've heard on podcasts where people were playing over VTT, or the experiences that people have had where they've been frustrated. Because let's be honest, if you go on social media, people are more likely to be talk about the things they're frustrated by than the things that are just working. Maybe they'll talk about the things that are going really well, things that went brilliantly, things that went perfectly, things they're very excited about. But if something just works the way it's supposed to work, it tends not to get mentioned. And that's true outside of even the RPG realm. So that's why you hear so many kind of extreme voices on social media versus just common everyday circumstances. But I'm getting off topic. So yes, VTTs have a good a good uh, something a service that they can perform. If nothing else, it can open you up to more people available for play. If you live in a very rural area, or an area where there aren't a lot of your type of gamer, or even gamers in general, then VTTs can obviously be a great boon to that circumstance. So as long as everyone is technologically savvy enough to use one and to grok what you're doing, or even if you do something just over Zoom, that's a good way to maybe have a more consistent game day experience. And you can mix and match. You can say, some weeks it's going to be hard to get away and do the travel, and other weeks it's not. So some weeks you might do VTT, some weeks you might do in face to face play. So thank you very much for that call. Very thought provoking. You always do bring up some interesting things. And Mirk the Meek has his own podcast, folks, called Mirk the Meek, and you should check it out because he he has some good things to talk about.
Hey, Jason here. Really enjoyed episode 75. I don't want to inundate you with calls. Just want to mention we're talking with Mirk about oracles. And the other thing I like for oracles to do, in addition to say success or yes, no, or end but, is to let you know when a complication happens. When a wrench is thrown in the works. And you could use end or but for that, but it's also when something random interferes that nobody's expecting, an event that isn't involved in the question you asked, right? And the way I do that is when the dice roll doubles. And if you want those events to happen less often, instead of using D6s, you could use D8s or D12s or, D20s, whatever. You can just increase the size of the die that you're rolling. But when you get those doubles, then something unexpected happens. So while your character's doing their interaction, the store across the street gets robbed, or another adventuring party happens to blunder in the middle of the encounter, or whatever, right? But I like to have that kind of thing thrown in there as well to keep you on your toes. Anyhow, and it's not something you have to use, just an idea. But take care. Great show. I look forward to hearing the results of the battle and what you do going forward.
Well, thank you, Jason, for that suggestion. That's something I hadn't really thought about, having something just completely random happen as a result of the table, and that would almost be a perfect thing for the double blank rolls, because it'd be potentially four rolls out of 36, so roughly one out of 9. So it'd be about the same as rolling a D8 and two D8s and getting them to match up. So that's a good idea. That's something I may have to look about implementing, coming up with just sort of a random group of tables, random group of events, random situations, maybe just random things that happen in the world. It wouldn't even have to happen at that moment. It could just be something that happens later on, as you say, not related to the question, or it could be related to the question. It could be one of those things like synchronicity, something going out into the world, the very notion of the question, the core of the question, going out into the world and pulling not an answer, but triggering a related event that's somehow connected in time or space or person or thing, item, some sort of similarity to what is being asked about, but not directly related to it. That's a good idea. I'm going to have to think on that some more. And yes, this time there will be orcs. So be ready for that. But first, more muster. This section is called Scenario Formation. It starts on page 133. But I'm going to zip over to page 139 for a moment, because he has a group of essentially three types of venturing. Three historically common campaign structures is what they're labeled. The first is the basic excursion model. The original mega dungeons were played this way, where there's a GM's dungeon, and each session consists of starting at a headquarters, going on the excursion, and then returning and scoring. And there's session after session after session of exploring the dungeon that way. The second structure he shows is basic module Pearl String. Adventure modules teach play this way, where the GM preps modules, and each module consists of several sessions of play, and you follow one module after another after another. And the third is advanced negotiated sandboxing, when the game gets deep, which consists of a negotiation phase, prep, downtime, dickering, dollhousing, and then followed by scenario play, dungeoneering, hex crawling maneuvers, and intrigue. And it goes in that cycle: negotiation, scenario, negotiation, scenario. So, going back to start of the chapter. A prepared operational campaign is a platform. It consists of a group and a schedule that form a play space. Players set up a setting and characters. This is a D&D campaign. How is it a platform? In the sense that once the campaign is ready, it can be used to present adventures, or to use a more generic wargaming term, scenarios. As long as the campaign persists as a social and creative construct, it is available for the players as a potential platform to launch new challenges. The process by which the campaign moves from being ready to play to entering a specific scenario is of great technical interest, as this is the stage during which much about the ultimate fate of the adventure is being determined. How many adventures are exploring? What are the perils? Arguably, the correlation of forces is what ultimately determines the band of possible outcomes for any adventure before we bring actual player maneuvers into it. A proper attitude towards scenario formation involves a type of exploration play that allows natural campaign events and the strategic sensibilities of the players to inform the parameters of play. The traditional understanding of this matter revolves heavily around the concept of game balance. I hope to show that an a priori benchmarking of this sort is not necessary, and is in fact harmful for the wargaming way. The game will be better if the referee and the players bring their own ideas of possible adventures to the table and negotiate the terms of engagement with a sense of campaign continuity and realistic strategic goal setting. Dynamic balancing. One of the most fundamental design choices that D&D has undergone is its historical evolution is resolving the balancing problem by reducing the game to a skirmish combat board game. By treating the game as a series of combat encounters, it's possible to calculate how many enemies of what type provide an appropriate challenge for a given adventuring party. This solution is unacceptable for the wargaming way, as the responsibility for the outcome moves from the players to the game's system. The balancing problem is this. As the game is not fun when adventuring is too easy or too hard, how does the referee ensure the level of challenge is just right? Early D&D largely runs on precedent benchmarking when it addresses the question at all. An appropriate challenge for a first-level party is an encounter with 3d6 goblins because that's how it's developed to be. An adventure for a fourth-level party is known to be such due to a combination of eyeballing and comparing to prior examples. However, there is a more fundamental approach to that conundrum to be had. Dynamic balancing is an approach that arises from the explorative aspect of wargaming. What if, instead of assuming that the referee is responsible for game balance, we allow the group to discover scenario balancing through the activity of play itself? The simplest illustration of this principle is allowing the adventuring party to choose which scenario under which conditions they are willing to tackle. This is a traditional part of an extended open world D&D. Adventurers discover opportunities to adventure, research these opportunities, and make choices. This is absolutely different from having the referee choose the scenario. The kind of play that occurs in the in-between scenario exploratory space is best understood as scenario negotiation. It may well actually be an explicit negotiation. The play group plainly talks out what kind of scenario they would like to play next. But negotiation may as well be implicit, subsumed in the low-stakes exploration of the campaign setting. Besides choosing the scenario, a group allowed to explore the setting and develop stories in between scenarios will also be able to engage in a gentle tug-of-war over the resources the party brings to the scenario they choose. Can we afford the logistics tail to reach the target dungeon? We should haggle for more of an advance from the quest giver. If the ref grants us 10 hirelings, we can tackle this. A referee who prepares for the players to accept or refuse this scenario will also be procedurally prepared for the adventurers to retreat from a scenario. This, again, is a massive dynamic balancing factor. Variations include such concepts as partial success and sub-goals, all of which enable a party with dim prospects to dynamically revise their goals in the scenario to accord with the facts on the ground. And if it should happen that the scenario proves too easy after all the haggling, well, sometimes the players do indeed outmaneuver the game world and the campaign and achieve victory in the strategic level. Good for them, And an easy scenario may be escalated when the situation develops, and it can be executed summarily with a faster play procedure, so you can move on from an easy adventure to the follow-up challenges. Which dynamic balancing factors are in play in a campaign depend a lot on the overall structure, but even a basic D&D campaign where maneuvering begins at the dungeon door should at the very minimum have the option of retreat. You can't ever mess up too badly as the referee in choosing what scenarios to present if the campaign is completely serious about letting the players call it off and preserve their beloved character assets should they conclude that the scenario does not seem feasible. The balancing problem can only raise its ugly head if you disempower the players from affecting their destiny. If the referee does indeed choose what you'll play and how you'll play, and what choices must be done in play, then it is on their head if the dice roll awry and a beloved character dies. Allowing dynamic balancing to occur by enabling the players to make strategic decisions, even if it is just the decision to retreat, is a fundamental necessity for the real challenge to survive. The next section of this chapter is called Negotiating Outside the Scenario Box. A common misunderstanding of the neutral arbiter role of the referee is that you must be strict at all times. However, the actual structure of the game is more complex than that, and while many referees seem to grasp the creative dynamics naturally, sometimes there is cognitive confusion. Why do I feel like the game cannot possibly function if I keep being objective, simulative all the time? It's because it can't. An extended campaign necessarily has two distinct phases that switches between as we keep playing. One is the scenario play that we do when everything is set up and the hunt is on. The other phase of play is what happens in between the scenario play and the negotiation phase. We haven't quite established everything for the scenario to begin yet, and so we're still exploring, still negotiating what the next challenge will be like. The player roles are fairly different in the scenario play and in the negotiation phase. As a player, your job during a scenario is to think and maneuver to win the scenario. During the negotiation phase, there is nothing real to win or lose. There are no stakes on the table. This enables the players to maneuver more freely to negotiate the terms of the next challenge with the referee. And similarly, on the referee side, during scenario play, you are strict and fair and play the situation as it falls. You don't fudge probabilities or merely assume that things fall together in a convenient way. But when the game enters a negotiation phase, you as well have vaster, greater discretion. The goal is scenario formation, and it cannot possibly happen if you pretend to be an unbiased machine. An example to illustrate the difference between the phases of play. Hiring mercenaries mid-adventure. If adventurers decide during a scenario that they cannot handle the challenge alone, that they need help, the referee will presumably determine the availability of mercenaries in the local settlements by simulating the situation. There could be help available at prices the adventurers can afford or not. If not, maybe this is a loss then and the party should give up. Hiring mercenaries in scenario negotiation. When you're considering a new adventure with the group and the players conclude that they need help before tackling the scenario, it behooves the referee to suggest that mercenary hirelings are available at affordable terms, not at terms that trivialize the scenario for the referee, but to an extent that makes it possible for play to actually occur. If you cannot bend this much, then we must play a different scenario. So moving outside the text, what the author seems to be describing here, especially at the beginning, is what most people in OSR and old school style games would refer to as sandbox style play or an open world or a living world, where a referee either prepares a lot of different material or a lot of modules or some adventure or a lot of different adventure hooks, and the players decide which ones they're going to pursue, where it's not a linear narrative. You're moving beyond, we're going to the dungeon again, we're going to keep going to this dungeon. That the basic style of D&D that the author described earlier was to where there are more options for the players to go. And he's dividing the campaign itself into the actual tackling of the adventures that the players choose to go on from how the adventures are set up. And he's suggesting that while he's saying in the text explicitly that you don't plan everything as a balance. You don't say, okay, there's this many hit dice of players, and so you need to provide this many hit dice of monsters. The players have these kind of resources, so you need to make sure their opponents, potential opponents, have these kinds of resources to keep it from being too easy or too hard. What he's saying instead is you prepare scenarios of varying degrees of difficulty. You make sure that there is the ability of the players to perceive what the adventures potentially could be, and then they choose how they choose. And as long as you're leaving open the option of maneuvering, of avoiding, and even of retreating, that's fine. The scenario is essentially dynamically balanced as the players will learn when they are in over their heads. And since you have not decided ahead of time exactly how dangerous it'll be, as long as you communicate what the players are seeing and understanding about the world around them, that's okay, because you're not simply deciding ahead of time this is how it's going to end by saying, okay, this is going to be too tough for them and it's going to be a total party wipe, or this is going to be real easy for them and it's going to be a walkover. Maybe it will turn out to be a walkover, and that, if that happens from time to time, that's okay, because it enables them to move on to the next scenario. But the author is describing that in between scenarios, while the players are exploring the world, getting a feel for the world, it's okay for things to be available to the players, for resources to be more available to them prior to starting a scenario than it would be during the scenario. Because during the scenario, you have to play the world as it is. And if the resources they need to complete this quest, this goal, to reach this goal, are not available in the world because of the way things have played out, then it's not. That just means they didn't plan as well as they could have, and they may just have to fail, or they may have to withdraw and try again at a later date. So there's a strategic aspect of play for the players, and there is a strategic aspect of play for the referee. And it's a matter of, once a course of action has been chosen, play the world as the world should be, as it's been set up to be. Moving back to the text, as you can see, the appropriate stance that everybody takes during the two phases of play is different. During a scenario concerned with what is possible, outside of a scenario more concerned with working what is meaningful, what is fun, and what the group wants to do. Applying the in-scenario thinking to exploration play results in unnecessary meandering, and applying exploratory mindset to the actual scenario results in biased adjudication that cannot distinguish between good and bad tactics. It's possible to perceive the two campaign phases as the referee relaxing and tightening his oversight according to the situation. When the important thing is to establish the scenario, you perform challenge coordination. And when the important thing is resolving the scenario, you perform strict adjudication. The experienced referee may sometimes switch between these two phases quite quickly and often as play dips in and out of various challengeable situations. Another way to look at this is that the negotiation phase pits the desires of the players for what they want to do, for what they want for their characters, against the desires of the GM, how they want to acknowledge the campaign setting, what kind of scenario they want to play. While actual play pits the warcraft of the players against the modeled facts of the scenario. It's not players versus GM in either case, not really, but the former is surely more of a negotiation, while the latter is more of a clash. And the final section of this chapter is emergent discovery. If play consists of two phases, negotiation phase and the scenario play, and the negotiation phase is supposed to be the touchy-feely, everybody gets what they want thing, then does that mean we don't need to use rules and game state to track in between scenarios? After all, what does it matter if what we're trying to do is set up the next scenario? How much does it matter how much money the adventurers have, or how much political favor, or where they get that ship? If they can't get a ship, they can't sail to the adventure island, and then we don't have a game, so why bother worrying about where the ship comes from? This observation is entirely true to an extent. Basic D&D specifically will actually benefit overall from the players having a clear sense of what matters in this sense and what does not need to. You're playing a scenario when you're in the dungeon, and while there it matters a lot how much of anything, including breathable air, you have. But when you return to the base town from the dungeon, what does it actually matter? Living adventurers will recuperate in time, and then you can go back to the dungeon. The wealth you bring out matters for XP scoring, but doesn't really do anything in a strategic sense. You're still going back to the dungeon, and you're doing it with roughly the strategic positioning that you'd be doing anyway. To be explicit, this is actually how you're supposed to set up adventures in basic campaigns that do not include playable strategic operations. The referee offers the party an adventure at the adventure island, and then outright decides for the scenario setup convenience, an NPC decides to ship the adventurers to the location. It's a cutscene to get to the scenario started. Don't worry about it. And likewise, when adventurers bring wealth back from the dungeon, the game has a culture of mealy-mouthed step dancing around the question of whether the money matters. Can my character purchase a healing potion? Can he buy 100? A +1 magic weapon? The basic game's answer should be no. Money doesn't really matter. Everybody starts a new dungeon at roughly the same position, no matter if they throw away their money or spend it wisely. You don't actually maneuver in between dungeons. But of course, that's not how things always go in D&D. A character gets rich and the players calculate how much an entire inn costs and find out that this guy has enough money to buy his own inn. Dream occupation. So they'll actually retire from adventuring to run an inn instead. It's all between adventures funny play, not a serious challenge. Just a bit of fun before the player creates a new adventure to go on the next trip. But it did remove a character from play. That's a real consequence. The point is that things can happen in the negotiation phase, important things in the sense that they inspire the group's campaign direction. A circus comes to town. It's just a throwaway comment by anybody, and in addition to the tapestry of narration. Yet somehow the referee gets inspired to run a circus of crime adventure, seizing on the detail and pitting the adventurers against evil clowns. What started as a low-stakes, loose ideation emerges... ideation. Ooh, stumbled over that word. What started as a low-stakes, loose ideation emerges into a serious scenario. That's why established, powerful campaigns tend to run fairly sticky world simulation, even between actual scenarios, tracking the calendar, party finances, wider geography, and all kinds of other things that are not directly scenario pertaining, makes for a lush undergrowth of inspiration in actually negotiating the next adventure. How else would you ever end up wandering a dungeon naked and drunk, if not because the downtime events after that last adventure strongly suggested something along those lines? Allowing the strategic campaign state to inspire the adventure planning is the path of inspiration. So we're going to end it there. And we will pick it up again in the next episode. So if you have any comments about what I read or some of the comments I threw in the middle there, please contact me. My contacts are in the show notes, and you'll hear them at the end of the episode. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Day 109, since the Dragon's Rampage began. The day began with units of light cavalry and mounted bowmen setting off north and south on the first patrols of the King's Road. The party then began showing the officers and craftsmen through the secured sections of the keep. They were introduced to the dwarves and the gnomes, and discussions were had to determine modifications to establish quarters and facilities to support the militia that would be based here. The party then returned to the front area of the keep, preparing for an afternoon to delve deeper into the dungeon and taking a midday meal. The end of the meal was interrupted by the cry, "Orcs! Orcs!" Orc skirmishers moved up with the intent to fling their spears, while their longbows and crossbows engaged human archers on the hillside. But the light infantry acted first, withdrawing to the base of the hillside while the archers above covered them, killing 3 crossbow orcs and a longbow orc, and injuring an assistant leader. This fire so unnerved the orcs that they could not find a target among the wooded thickets on the hill. The skirmishers' spears wounded several infantrymen, and the orcs drew their axes and short swords. As the battle continued, the light infantry readied their javelins. The archers on the hill split their fire between the longbows and an orc subchief and his guards who had emerged from the woods. From the keep, mounted knights charged the axe-wielding skirmishers on the hillside left, while a unit of heavy infantry rounded the hill on the right. The orc longbowmen again targeted the human archers on the hill, while the crossbows moved up to lessen their range. The skirmishers moved to engage, while the orc subchief charged. Other groups of orcs continued moving up and out of the woods. Again, the party's men acted first. The archers killed more longbow orcs and scored hits on the tough guards of the subchief's unit. Javelins killed 3 axe and 2 sword-wielding orcs, and the heavy cavalry charged into the flank of the axe-wielding skirmishers, killing 4 and injuring the leader and his assistant. The orc spirit broke, and they surrendered, except for the leader and the assistant, who were killed trying to flee. The party emerged from the keep to see the heavy cavalry, disorganized by their charge and taking prisoners, being approached by the orc chief and his guards with their banner flying high. But the orcs pulled up short of the knights, having expected to merely be following the skirmishers up the hill to the archers. But the short-sword skirmishers' attack and subchief charge killed 4 light infantry, while orc arrows killed 1 archer. The knights attempted to reorganize to face the orc chief, while sending the guarded prisoners up the hill. The heavy infantry charged a new group of axe-wielding orcs that were approaching the human light infantry on the right. The archers continued dueling the orc long and crossbows, and the light infantry at the bottom of the hill fought bravely against their foes. At the keep, a unit of light infantry was forming up from picket duty on the other side of the road, and their partnered archers took position to defend the keep and send a small unit toward the battle. Gus charged the orc chief's unit on his warhorse, while the rest of the party followed on foot. The orc chief intended to charge the knights while they recovered from their own attack. The orcs attacking the light infantry pressed home their advantage on the thin human line. The orc bows kept firing on the human bows. The orc axemen intended to flank the archers. Other orc units continued to move in. Again, the humans beat the orcs to action. The knights hustled the prisoners off the field while arraying themselves to receive the orc chieftain's charge. Gus slammed into that unit's flank, killing 1 guard and wounding another. The light infantry fought bravely at the bottom of the hill, wounding several of the sub-chief's guards and killing 4 of the short-sword-wielding skirmishers. The heavy infantry slammed into the orc axes, killing 10 of them. The archers on the hill let fly, killing 2 more longbow orcs. This sequence of events was devastating to the orcs. The longbows broke and ran. The axemen and short-sword skirmishers surrendered, except for their leaders, but this would weaken the light infantry as they had to split off men to escort the prisoners. It did not all go the humans' way. The orc chief's group charged into the heavy cavalry, killing a knight and a sergeant. The sub-chief's guard killed the sergeant leading the left wing of the light infantry. The hard-pressed light infantry tried to hold on. The archers turned their attention to the crossbows. The heavy infantry on the right pressed onto the next group of advancing orcs. The light infantry assembled off the keep advanced to throw javelins at a group of flail and pike-armed orcs on the human far left. Gus pressed into the chief's guards, joined by Sven and Bernie and the knights. Prier and MacLeod led their 3 heavy infantry men-at-arms to reinforce the light infantry at the bottom of the hill. Katja took aim at the flails and the pikes with a psionic blast. Harl and Quinn and the archers Prier and MacLeod brought with them targeted the flail group with arrows. Cudgel would do the same with magic missile. Edgar cast Entangle at the chief orcs group. The chief's guards continued to mix it up with the knights. The sub-chief continued to attack the light infantry, joined by a phalanx of battle-axe, spear, and all pike orcs. Another similar formation would attack the heavy infantry. The light crossbow orcs engaged the human archers, and the flail pike formation targeted the party. But the first action was the light infantry facing the sub-chief to break, disengaging and retreating up the hill, throwing many of the archers into disarray. On the left of the hill, Katya's psionic attack stunned or put to sleep all but 4 of the flail and pike-wielding orcs. Arrows and Cudgel's magic missile killed 2 more. Edgar entangled the orc chief and all but 3 guards and all but 4 of the knights. Gus, Bernie, Sven, and the still free knights killed off the free guards. The heavy infantry killed the leaders of the axe-orcs which had fled, and 1 axe-wielder from the next orc unit. The archers reformed, while a few fired wild shots at the crossbow orcs. The light infantry tried to hang on. The entangle spell had caused the orc banner to fall, visible to all the orcs on the field. The crossbows and remaining flails broke and ran. The unit facing the heavy infantry killed 1 human soldier, but then all but the leaders withdrew. They retreated directly into another orc unit, who became disorganized and retreated as well. The phalanx attacking the light infantry killed another soldier. The sub-chief group killed 1 of Prier and MacLeod's men-at-arms. The orcs continued to press hard into the center and right. The sub-chief group versus Prier and MacLeod's small group, 1 phalanx seeking to finish the light infantry, and 1 last phalanx challenging the heavy infantry. The party knights and 2nd light infantry units attempted to relieve Prier and MacLeod. The archers on the hill took a chance, firing into the melees against the sub-chief and phalanx facing the light infantry, even as more archers joined them on the hill. The heavy infantry pressed against the orc leader in front of them. This time, the orcs acted first. The sub-chief's guards felled the remaining 2 heavy infantry men-at-arms and MacLeod, down to -1 hit point. The orcs killed another two light infantry. The last orc phalanx and battle axe leader hit the heavy infantry, killing 1. The light infantry engaged in a fighting withdrawal of the hill, leaving their leader, even as the ones that were sent off with the orc prisoners returned to join him. The few knights appeared behind Prier. The archers killed 1 battle axe orc in the phalanx facing the light infantry. The heavy infantry killed the remaining battle axe unit leader, as well as 3 orcs of the last phalanx. At the keep, 2 units of horse archers and one of light cavalry and 1 of light infantry formed up. The heavy infantry was pressing home its attack on the orc phalanx. The light infantry, returning from escorting the prisoners, formed a line to hold back the oncoming orc phalanx. The few knights that were freed from the entangle tried to relieve Prier. The archers fire into the melees of the heavy infantry and light infantry again to keep the orcs from pushing through. The party attempts to turn back the sub-chief and guards. Gus, Bernie, and Sven circle around behind the orcs. Cudgel, Edgar, Quinn, and Harl engage with missile fire, Katya unleashing another psionic blast. Prier turned away to lay hands on MacLeod. The 2nd light infantry group skirts the entangled orcs and knights, trying to approach the battle line. The 3 orc units are pressing home their attacks on the human right and thin center. Fortune is with the humans. Katya's psionic blast places 9 of the 12 guards in a coma. The party and archers' missile fire are largely ineffective, but the few knights shield Prier and MacLeod with similarly futile attacks. But the archers and a few light infantry fare better. The phalanx they targeted suffers 7 casualties. The heavy infantry inflicts 4 deaths on the orcs in front of them. This effort by the human forces proves too much for the orc warriors. The remaining orcs of the 2 phalanxes surrender. The sub-chief and 3 upright guards attempt to flee. The guards are cut down and the sub-chief escapes. And with that, the party's forces are victorious. The last units from the keep arrive to help with rounding up the prisoners and the trapped and incapacitated orcs. And that was the orc battle. Just as a quick note, I kept using the term phalanx. I probably should have said this beforehand. In most cases, once I had 2 units charging together, I viewed them as sort of a mass of melee, sort of intermixed among each other. But there were 3 units of orcs that were essentially layered units, tightly packed layered units with battle axes in front, spears in the middle, and pole arms at the back, all pikes, so that they could attack on a short section with a lot of force. And so I referred to these as phalanxes because that's a tight-knit formation that's historical. But those were usually, they were all spears and not a mixed group of weapons. But that's the way I visualized it. So they wouldn't be as intermixed. They would be subject to being flanked and such. And that's what the heavy infantry ended up doing. That's how they inflicted some casualties on one of them. But I just wanted to put that in there in case you're trying to visualize it. Once two groups charged into each other, or one group charged into another, they were all mixing it up. And that's why the entangle spell caught up most of the knights as well as most of the chief's unit. And that's why the orcs were able to really inflict a lot of damage in some cases, because they were outnumbering units that had been whittled down, particularly the light infantry unit in the middle of the line. And so they were able to get a lot of attacks compared to only a few. So there was a lot going on. Morale played a big part, and it was very interesting. So we've had another orc battle in the books. I wonder how many more we'll have. Anyway, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were able to follow it a little bit. Obviously, this would be better with visuals or something. I'm hoping to put together a video or a blog post or something. I took some pictures of the battlefield as I was doing it. So we'll see. It's about finding the time. Anyway, thank you for listening, and thank you for listening to the podcast as a whole, and hope you will return and listen next time. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.